Welcome to Mentors Collective. I'm here with Leland Stillman. He is a functional medicine doctor, which is a privilege for me. I get to sit down and talk medicine with a fellow doctor who finished a residency in internal medicine, and we're going to be talking about some hot button topics in the healthcare space today. Medicine's an interesting place, Leland.
Absolutely. It's very interesting right now. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So, Leland, what is your background in medicine? What is your specialty? Where do you offer some value?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I got started in health and wellness about 20 years ago, 34 now, I was 14. Just became fascinated by health, wellness, nutrition, diet, lifestyle, dove into that, learning on my own, reading books, had a lot of mentors along the last 20 years in conventional medicine, integrative, functional, natural medicine. And then eventually I did really well in college, well enough to get into medical school. So I went to medical school, University of Virginia, spent a lot of time in the allergy and immunology division, but was very disillusioned with how conventional medicine was being practiced. The way the system was set up clearly did not serve the patient. It was clearly about, meeting the regulatory standards, appeasing the government bureaucrats, keeping the payers, Medicare, Medicaid, health insurance companies satisfied, and the patients were being put last. And on top of that, there was an attitude in conventional medicine, in major hospitals, academic medical centers, what might be so-called scientific medicine, that natural integrative medicine could only ever be a bit player in what we did. You were not going to use herbs or supplements or vitamins or minerals or lifestyle or exercise as your mainstay. You were going to use drugs and surgeries. And so that's all I was trained to do. And it didn't sit well with me. It wasn't what I grew up using as a patient myself. It wasn't what my family grew up using and relying on. It didn't make sense to me that we were dismissing natural medicine because it has such an obvious value. And always when they say, well, there's a lack of evidence for it, when you go back to the literature, it's very clear that all the preliminary evidence is there, but no one has the financial incentive to study it in the way that drugs and surgeries are studied for a long list of reasons. So then I just started to learn more about it, trained in it informally with different mentors along the way. And then in 2019, I joined someone's practice. And then in 2021, I split off from their practice to do my own thing and have been practicing solo for the last 2 years.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. I am super excited to dive into some of the topics that you just mentioned.
Yes.
The Western pushback on natural medicine, and oftentimes they'll cite a lack of research as
Mm-hmm.
one big one. And then we can definitely dive into some problems with the conventional medical system. Obviously, I left very early on. I finished medical school, did a little bit of training, never got board certified. You went all the way, and you took that, and now you're doing something personalized that is, I think, the best way to help people, that is outside of conventional medicine. And I'm sure a lot of Western docs don't like what you're doing, don't necessarily approve of it, but I bet 10 years down the line, that sentiment's going to change quite a bit.
I agree. I think that things are really,
Sorry.
yeah,
Hold that response. I'm going to put all these dogs upstairs. This is good. So, Dr. Stillman, tell me, what is functional medicine for those that don't know?
that's a great question. What's funny about this is I remember listening to one of the leaders of functional medicine give a very long explanation of it once, and I thought that is a very cumbersome definition. There's no way I'm going to remember that, and there's no way I'm going to be able to repeat it. But when I first heard the term functional medicine, I thought, what is that? And then I really thought about functional medicine as a term, right? Functional medicine.
Yes.
And I thought about what I do and found myself naturally wanting to do with patients was we want to focus on your function. So much in the medical paradigm, the patient's functionality and their ability to perform takes a complete back seat. It's just about, oh, you've got this disease. Well, here's the treatment, and here's how often to take the drug, and here's what dose. And I didn't find that I had real time to talk to people about, well, how is this actually impairing your function?
Yes.
How is this actually affecting your life? And what is it about its effect on you that's making it a problem? Because the reality is that patients actually don't care what illnesses they have. They care how those illnesses affect their lives. A lot of them are walking around with like a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and they don't even think about it. It never comes up. For the most part, it's just like a detail of their medical chart somewhere in their medical record. They may not even know that they have the diagnosis.
Right.
What they care about is concrete, real world, practical stuff. How much energy do you have when you get up in the morning? How sharp is your mind and your memory? How well can you perform in the boardroom, in the bedroom, on the soccer field, whatever arena of life you care about? And how intensely basically can you live your life? How far can you push the envelope of your performance before you start to break down? That's function. That's what that's about. So when I'm looking at a case, I'm totally focused on that function. Now, I always tell my patients when we're talking about therapeutics, because they're always coming to me with, do I take this or do I take that? And how much do I take? And when do I take it? And how often?
We'll dive into
Whatever.
some of that. That's the fun
Right.
stuff.
But I'm always explaining to them, look, there's only two ways to basically dose anything. Are you treating a symptom or are you treating a number? Like a vitamin D is a great example of this, right? You give someone vitamin D and they may see their allergy symptoms mitigate. They may see their asthma exacerbations go down. They may see their, incidence of colds, respiratory illnesses decline dramatically, right? That's treating symptoms.
Yes.
Then you look at the number, right? What did it do to the serum vitamin D level? That's a different question. And so that's how I approach it. And it's all about how do I optimize their function and decrease the risk of loss of function as much as possible so they're going to have the best life that they can have for as long as possible. And that's where the conventional paradigm totally breaks down. It's totally
to conventional medicine. Why do you think they don't, MDs, traditional MDs at
Yeah.
institutions don't practice medicine like that?
Wow. It has to do with basically 3, 4, 5 generations of thinking that's been driven by a business model that maximizes return on reacting to problems. And I didn't understand this until I really became a business owner, because ultimately, I never heard this until a couple years back. And when I heard this quote from the father of Western medicine, Hippocrates, it really stuck with me. And I plastered it all over my social media. I was like, this is my motto. This should be over the lintel of every door in every medical school, everywhere in the world. He said, the greatest medicine of all is teaching people how not to need it. This is an atrocious business model. It is incredibly difficult to pull off, because if you look at how medicine, how you can make money and then create and build a business around medicine, and with 25, 24, whatever it is, percent of the GDP going into healthcare, right?
Yes.
There's fortunes being made on it. And there's nothing wrong with paying your doctor well. I think you'd be crazy to pay them poorly. It's one of the biggest problems with how consumers think about health today. But the bottom line is that if you make your service obsolete, you've just destroyed your customer. And that fundamentally is what the physician is called to do, whether or not they do it or not. And so that thinking and that business model, and really what I view it as, because every time, and this is again as a business owner, I've realized every time we have a problem in the business, that problem is an opportunity. And so what I explain to patients when they're like, well, your rates are high, or this is expensive, or I don't understand why you're recommending that I do this program with you or this other thing or taking this course, is I say, look, I'm not here to sell you like a bucket of supplements every month for the rest of your life. I'm not here to sell you some big, expensive surgery that ultimately has a double-digit failure rate, even in 6 months, and then it has an even higher failure rate in 10 years, and it doesn't fix the underlying problem that you actually have, which is a dysfunctional diet, lifestyle, and environment. And even your emotions, right? How you think, how you feel, how you relate to other people.
Right.
I'm here to really teach you how to need me as little as possible. And then we make me, and I had patients, it's really funny, who would go through a program with me, and we would get to the end of the program and I would say, look, if you want to have contact with me on a regular basis, access to me, support from me via cell phone, text message, email, whatever, it's this much a month. And they said, well, I don't really know if I need that. I'm so healthy. Why would I do that? And so I was like, all right, well, I guess.
Good problem to have.
It's a good problem for them to have.
As a business owner.
But it's a challenging problem for me as a business owner.
But you better believe if you do a good job and you get someone from a bad point in health to a good point, health is one of those universal things where we all suffer from something at some point.
Right.
And if I find a good doctor, good doctors are hard to come by.
I know it.
My business partner's been through like 50 locally.
Huh, I
Can't
don't
find a
blame
good
you.
one. Can't
Yeah.
find someone to take him seriously, sit down with him,
Yeah.
really look into his chart,
Right.
ask him his history. So when you find that person, it's going to pay off dividends and referrals. People will refer, and there's enough people on
Right.
planet Earth
Right.
locally, especially when you're doing medicine primarily remotely, that you can access. So I think you should be a role model for a lot of doctors out there who are practicing to get people to a point where they don't need to see you every month. I think that's a great way to look at it.
Right. And not just need to see me every month, because what I saw in the conventional world was there was a huge incentive to not let the patient die, right? Like I look at the amount of money being spent in the ER and the ICU on like a minute to minute basis.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking at all those things, I mean, it's just,
With
you
a
know,
price tag on
one
them.
piece of equipment after another. And I mean, the way that the staff doesn't have to worry about the cost because they know the payer is going to pick it up. So things just get used, thrown out, used, thrown out. Healthcare is one of the most wasteful industries we have.
It was so painful to watch.
I know, because you know that, it's like Eisenhower said something like every bomb, every gun, every missile, every bullet that we make is a child that's not going to be fed. It's a school that's not going to be built. It's something of meaning and value for humanity that is being poured into something that fundamentally in our country is 99% of the time being used to fix a diet lifestyle issue.
Yeah. And it's funny if you're in a surgical or ICU and you're watching these things get dispensed with no regard for the cost.
I know.
It's not even a thought in their mind. In fact, I think it's worse than that. If someone brings up the price, they're shamed for it. Because why would you consider the price or the cost? There's a life at stake.
I know.
And I think that's one of the fundamental problems with healthcare now and why a lot of people don't have access to care.
Right. And unfortunately, it has to do with industry capture of the regulatory bodies because they've really made it. Because I talk to other people who are developing products, products for patients, products for doctors, just products in the healthcare space.
Yeah.
It's so hard to develop products. As a small business owner, it's the number of things I have to keep track of just to be in compliance is dizzying, especially compared to other business owners. It got so bad that we actually split the business into two businesses. We have a coaching business and education business that's completely separate now from the medical practice.
Good. Every doctor should.
It only makes sense.
It does.
But it's a little bit sad that the country's regulatory system is so broken that it makes sense for me to, in some ways, do twice as much work to do the same work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's also something to be said about the patients that are willing to go through a course to learn how to take care of themselves, because not a lot of them are willing to do that extra work. They'll only show up when something's very wrong.
I know. And I'm always going to, I don't know if I would say I struggle with it anymore, but I am very clear with them. And especially working with high performers, executives, CEOs, high level athletes, and also the people who support them, right? Like a CEO's got a wife who basically runs at the same speed he does, even if she doesn't spend time in the limelight and get all the credit or do the surgery or run the business or whatever. Yes. She's supporting him and working with them. At first I thought these people don't want to do the work. They don't want to learn the fundamentals. These are like people who buy a Ferrari and then don't care at all about learning how the thing works. They just want to drive it.
Yes.
At the same time, then I had experiences with people where I thought, I totally get why this person is driving their Ferrari like it's a rental. They have a 7, 8, 10, whatever $1 million deal on the table, and they want to have that money to create that legacy, to have that financial freedom or whatever. And it doesn't have to be money, right? It could be their athletic performance. It could be, having that, I have some patients who've got like 7 or 8 kids. It's really important to them to have more children.
Yes.
And whatever, and one of the things I'll talk to patients about, that's one of my favorite topics to talk to them about is, what is your goal? What's really important to you? Because that's the fundamental conversation that I think patients actually should have with their doctor first.
Yeah.
Because, and there's this guy, George Mallory. George Mallory was the first guy to summit Everest, and I think he died trying to summit K2. And people asked him, why do you want to climb Mount Everest? It's incredibly dangerous. It's cold. It's unpleasant. It's like, why would you want to do this? And he said, because it's there. And everyone's got something in their life that to other people doesn't make sense. Like to me, I've never had any kind of interest in climbing really tall, cold, frozen peaks. I don't know why I want to be really good, if not the best at what I do, but it's all I do. I don't really have hobbies. Like when I have a hobby, it's something like paddleboarding, which is like part of the whole wellness doctor thing.
Right. Supporting your health and mindfulness.
Yeah, but on top of that, it's like we'll do things with my hobbies that then create social media for the business,
Yeah.
and that also give me real world experience with exercise and physical fitness that I then pass on to patients. Like I can talk to them for 20, 30 minutes an hour about like, here are the benefits of paddleboarding and here's what you got to focus on in terms of your strategy with your biomechanics when you're paddleboarding. And here are the other things you could do while paddleboarding that will also help you be healthy. And I can put all this together for them. And it might sound silly, but in the end, all of those benefits stack up for them. And then they get better and better and better results in less and less and less time, which is effectively what they really want me to deliver to them.
Yes. Very good. Before we jump into some hot button topics from your social media, I'd love to finish the conversation on the healthcare system as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Say I were to appoint you president of the whole healthcare system today. You're in charge now.
Wow.
What are some immediate changes that you would make that you think could fix the way that conventional medicine is practiced today?
First thing I would do is insist that you give me a very large team of bodyguards.
Yes. Well, pharmaceutical companies are coming at you.
Worse than them, but yeah.
What's worse than them?
Like
Can't say.
the devil himself, I guess. But I mean, he runs the pharmaceutical companies. But anyway, what would I do? Wow. So the number one thing that I would do is focus on restoring the fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution to speech about health and wellness.
Hmm.
When we talk about health and wellness in public, the reality is that regulatory bodies have an insane degree of latitude to go after people to, frankly, destroy them for what they're doing. But this really holds back progress.
Yes.
And, capitalism delivers better solutions for living to the entire world and has for generations because people are free to speak their minds and act according to their conscience. And the more you violate that principle, the more you create a system where free enterprise doesn't thrive, it dies. And if you want to know how bad that is, it just look around at how few medical practices people actually want to be seen at.
Yeah.
We're not being allowed, or the latitude in terms of how we run our businesses, to deliver you the solution that you want as the consumer. So everyone hates their medical care. No one feels like they can afford it. Everyone feels like they're being taken advantage of, and no one has a better option. So that fundamental freedom of speech has to be protected and enshrined and returned to the American people. On top of that, and part of that really, is that people only make a fortune on things that they can patent in health and wellness.
Yes.
And because of that, what they'll do is they'll create the money from that product through the patent. And because they can restrict the speech of someone else for natural, holistic, 100% free solutions to that problem by saying, oh, you're practicing medicine without a license, oh, you're making medical claims that you can't substantiate, right? Because they can do that, they effectively are able to destroy their competition.
Yes.
And in what is really truly an act of economic war.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, and this is the discussion on herbals, essentially. There's so many of these that have been proven mostly anecdotally, and small studies have been done, but there's no financial incentive to do the big, 5 million person studies that the pharmaceutical companies can sponsor.
Right.
Things like saffron and turmeric. People always point to them and say, there's no, big studies that agree, so we can't justify making this a normal practice.
But the number one thing that I would do is truly to change the way change the way that health insurance, actually, yeah, there's two more things, is change the way that health insurance is structured, and then change the way that agriculture is regulated and subsidized in the country. The health insurance thing blew my mind when I thought about it, because I realized it doesn't make any sense to have health insurance and life insurance. If your life insurance company had to pay you an enormous amount of money upon your death, and they were allowed to offer you a health insurance plan, what they would do with that health insurance plan is they would do everything possible to keep you alive so you would keep paying your policy.
That's so interesting.
And so why did FDR split health and life insurance back in the 30s? I think it was him. And then also mandate that employers pay for health insurance. That would be like having car damage insurance and car destruction insurance. One party pays you when the car is destroyed, the other party pays you when the car is damaged. No one thinks that makes any sense for cars. Isn't it interesting that car insurance is really cheap compared to medical insurance?
Right.
But your car can still be $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, right? Even more than that. Not that the average person's car is. But the funny thing about cars and people, comparing them, is that cars don't fix themselves. People do. So that's why I've said before, and I'll say it again, if I had real latitude and freedom to offer people health insurance policies and plans, I would provide health insurance plans for less than people currently pay to insure their cars. And it's all about what you're offering, what you're covering, and how you're covering it. I could talk about that all day.
That's such an interesting thought, giving health insurance the responsibility for also covering the life insurance, because then the incentive
Right.
structure changes.
It's completely different. If you have why wouldn't you want to have a company whose financial incentive is to keep you alive as long as possible? Your health insurer actually, frankly, if their incentive is fundamentally to maximize the amount of money you're giving them every month.
Yes.
And if you die, they have no real significant loss. Now, people would say, well, yeah, but they want to minimize your health care costs, so why wouldn't they teach you to be healthy, push you to be healthy, provide you incentives? We've seen them do small things like jack up rates for people who won't quit smoking or whatever. But at the end of the day, the system is so tightly regulated that there's almost no competition in the space. And so the health insurance cartel will act in a way where they're driving up the prices. And if you allow real competition to enter, you could drop the prices. And that's all about the regulatory burden that I spoke to before. So, yeah.
Such an interesting conversation. Healthcare politics is just a wild thing, and the doctors, I feel like, are just sitting on the sidelines with almost no control over what happens there, and it's a shame. So a lot of doctors, I think, feel the way that we do, but can't voice that and don't really have any power to execute change over it. So it results in what we currently have, and it's a system that I don't know is fixable the way that it is.
I know, but the reality is, I think looking at the historical record, systems and institutions do not really successfully reform themselves.
Yeah.
They get splintered, they collapse, and then are recreated. Now, you look at something as old as like the Catholic Church, which is arguably sort of a follow-on to the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire's culture of basically deifying the emperor. These systems haven't collapsed, but over time, people have gotten disillusioned. They've started splinter movements like the Protestant Reformation. And that's just how it is. I mean, what you're going to see in the coming, decades, centuries, I think, in the West is lots of different systems, decentralizing and then re-centralizing, and who knows what will happen with medicine. In fact, I think it's kind of exciting because I think with chaos, you're going to see a lot of creation.
I think a lot of people are starting to move in the more natural direction, in the direction of private physicians such as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting to lose faith in the institution, which I think is a good thing. Now, we've talked politics for a while. Now let's talk a little bit of medicine.
Absolutely.
Medicine's fun.
It is.
There's a lot of controversial-ish things happening in healthcare right now. New drugs, obviously the diet debates, all of the different teams that gang up, the carnivores versus the vegetarians.
I know.
Let's start there. What team are you on when you're talking to your patients? Are you counseling them to go more meat-based, more vegetable-based? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
So, generally speaking, the vast majority of people coming to me do very well on a very similar dietary template. Partly, that's because my message resonates with a very specific group of people. Generally speaking, people who come to work with us are anywhere from 20 to 65.
Big range.
It is a big range. They're already relatively healthy in many respects. Usually there's 1, 2, or 3 big problems in their life that they really want us to help them with. their energy, their performance in some aspect of life, their mood. Any of these things is what we really tend to get the most. Those people, the dietary template that we see working for them is a really wide range of foods with a focus on nutrient dense, whole foods, elimination diets such as like eliminating gluten or dairy judiciously. But there's so many little criteria for why I would include or disinclude a food in a patient's diet. Like dairy is a great example of this. So number one, we see that stomach acid production naturally declines with age. Dairy is a very difficult food for your body to neutralize with stomach acid. There's a lot of buffering equivalents in it. That's just a chemical property of dairy.
That's why you get acid or like hot sauce in your eyeballs. You're supposed to rinse it out with milk.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so what you'll find is that the older people get, the more they tend to struggle with dairy, at least in as much as their dairy problems are an issue with stomach acid. But then you'll get people who have immune reactions to dairy. That's a totally different thing.
Yes.
And within the immune response, you've got 4 different types of hypersensitivity. So are they having a type 1, a type 2, a type 3, a type 4 hypersensitivity?
It's been a while.
They're all different, right? And then you can have, food intolerances like lactose intolerance. So the same food, you can have 3 different reasons, 5 different reasons, as many reasons as you want to recommend that a patient stop eating it. And you can have as many different reasons for recommending that they eat a food. And what I like to do with what I recommend to patients is be as elegant as possible and do as much work with as few changes as I can possibly make. So let's say that I have somebody who comes into the practice. They have an obvious need for copper based on blood work or hair analysis. And I see also that they have problems with methylation and B vitamins, their B6, their folate, their B12, whatever are impaired. That's a perfect person to give beef liver to. Now you take someone with a high copper level who's clearly having copper overload symptoms, who isn't able to regulate their copper, who doesn't have these methylation issues, and you give them beef liver and you make them worse. And so the diet debates are really funny to me because the truth is they've been going on since the beginning of time. And what's funny to me is everyone shows up to them at the beginning and they're like, oh, this is new. Like, I didn't know. People didn't debate this before. That's so funny. People have been debating diet forever. Yeah. And it's just, same old wine in new bottles. And so I'll recommend a vegan vegetarian template to one patient 1 minute, and then I'll tell someone to double down on the red meat the next. I don't see people doing well with extreme dietary templates for long periods of time in general. And Jim, my strength coach, personal trainer, he works on my team with me. We work in tandem on most of our cases together because we have such different skill sets and we bring such different value to the case. I mean, there's cases where I would never have gotten the same results without Jim.
Yeah.
And there's cases he's had where he needed a doctor to help him, get the results that we wanted to get. So when we're working with people, we'll actually take into account all these different things and figure out what exactly they need and what the best solution is for them. But we talk about this on our social media a lot. Probably the biggest misconception we see right now is that women will do well on a keto or carnivore template for a very prolonged period of time.
Interesting.
We don't see them performing well with severe carbohydrate restriction. The number one reason for that is when either women or men go keto or carnivore, they often unwittingly go low protein.
Yes.
And the reason they do that is that they think meat and dairy are high in protein, and that's true, but they can be so high in fat that you wind up with early satiety because the fat load tells your brain that you don't need to eat anymore, but you're only eating half as much protein as is optimal for your body composition and certainly for your body composition goals. Like Jim, part of how he won me over and turned me into such a fan of his is that when we started working together, I was not eating very much because it was just how I got used to eating, living like a high stress, high paced lifestyle. And I didn't know anything about lifting, never really spent any time in the gym. And he said, look, we're going to train twice a week, 3 times a week at most, 30 minutes, 45-minute workouts. They were not beat down workouts. I didn't walk out of the gym feeling like I was going to die. I never threw up. I felt good. And I actually felt better after the workouts in most cases than before the workouts. And he told me how to eat probably doubled the amount of calories I was eating, at least doubled the amount of protein I was taking in.
Yeah.
And I put on 18, 20 pounds in 3 to 4 months. And I didn't even notice. I got on the scale and it had gone from 160 to 180. And I actually didn't believe it. I thought this scale's off. And I went to the Publix next door and it was the same reading. And I thought, oh my gosh, Jim put 20 pounds of muscle on me in 3 or 4 months.
Amazing.
I didn't even notice. And all he did was take me to the gym 2 or 3 times a week and teach me how to eat differently.
Diet's such an interesting thing.
It is.
And I think anyone who says all vegan is good or all carnivore is good just doesn't know what they're talking about. They haven't worked with different patients.
Agreed.
My best friend Jesse is 6'5", 230. My whole life he was like jacked, full of muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Starts dating this girl. She's a vegan. Convinces him to try it because she was feeling so good. About 6 months in, I'm on a trip with my friends. I see Jesse. He is a stick of a man, a little carrot stick, pale in the face. And I'm like, Jesse, you look horrible. What's going on? It's like, yeah, I feel fine. I've gone vegan with my girlfriend. I'm like, man, vegan's not for you. He's been eating lentils and spinach for 6 months.
Yeah.
And he just looked terrible.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, my current girlfriend eats one bite of steak, feels horrible, has a reaction.
Right.
Like, you know what? Vegan might be for you. You should stop eating red meat and supplement with iron. And
Absolutely.
And it's just so personalized. And anyone who gets so obsessed with one way or the other and tries to go all in, I've almost always seen it go badly.
Yeah, my patients, more than one of my mentors has said this. My patients are definitely my greatest teachers.
Yes.
And I actually love cases where I don't get results right away because I think, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
This is a case where I get to learn something. This is exciting. And it's interesting you mentioned your girlfriend, that response to meat. So many people have that experience, and it's because of underlying problems with their metabolism where they don't have what they need in order to break that food down.
Yes.
And when you can actually get to the bottom of that, that's when you can radically expand someone's dietary template.
Yeah.
And so often what you see working isn't actually a dietary change. Like, I'll bring him up again, but because he's got so many good stories, but Jim had ulcerative colitis. It's what got him into health and wellness. They told him that he had to have his whole colon removed. And he said, look, I'm not doing that. And they told him, no, you have to have your colon removed. And he said, look, I'm like a 270 pound, like power lifter. There's no way you're going to keep me in the hospital. Like, I'll hurt you very badly. Please leave me alone and let me leave the hospital. So he leaves the hospital, uses a combination of nicotine and the paleo diet to completely reverse his ulcerative colitis. But he said the biggest thing that changed his digestive function wasn't a dietary hack. It wasn't a drug. It was getting more sunlight on his gut. And we see this all the time. We have
so interesting
indoor people living indoor lives. They're drinking the wrong water. They're eating the wrong food. They're taking the wrong supplements. They think they're doing it right, but no one's actually personalized anything for them. And on top of that, there's fundamentals they've never heard about. Because in the world of light is medicine, we talk about this all the time. The sun is the ultimate light therapy. And it's got some downsides and some drawbacks that I can talk about if you want. Yeah. But the reality is that no one makes any money advertising the sun. And so you're never going to hear about that except in sort of passing, or people like me who pound the table about it, because what I realized in my practice was when we don't get good results with people, 90% of the time it's because they're not executing the fundamentals or they're not engaging with us. And usually the lack of engagement drives the lack of execution, and the lack of execution then makes them feel weird about engaging with us because they know that we're going to hold them accountable and they don't want it to be awkward.
Right.
And so I say that to patients. I say that to my staff. I'm like, look, the number 1 and 2 reason for therapeutic failure in our practice is failure to engage and failure to execute. And we've got some really interesting and funny stories about that over the years.
Cool. And a last rant on diet, and then we'll move on to some other stuff. But I think it's really important for people listening, everybody, to just listen to their bodies. Like you mentioned, your partner with the ulcerative colitis. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got something like that. Like my girlfriend, she has a bite of meat and she feels sick. It's a sign from your body. Maybe you can't metabolize that. You're missing an enzyme. Mm-hmm. Stop eating it. Same thing with milk. If you're not able to metabolize it, maybe you should stop eating it. And if you're missing a critical vitamin or nutrient from that thing, you can supplement it or figure something else out.
There's almost always a food that you can eat to find the nutrient you're missing.
Right.
I've seen that over and over again. It's one of the coolest things about what I do. We find the food that you can tolerate to plug the nutritional hole that you have. And then, we work on improving your tolerance for other foods so that you can tolerate them.
All right, some other things that you're pounding the table on social media and in your practice. Birth control is a hot button one that I'd love to pick your mind about. What are your thoughts on birth control?
Birth control, I have very, very mixed feelings about. So, and the first question that comes to mind for me about birth control is that, and this is again, that goes back to the conversation that I have with my patients most and first, which is, what is your goal? When you talk to most women about what they want in life, somewhere in that mix of things is children. And even if that's not a priority for them at 18, 19, 20, 27, 28, 30, let alone 35 rolls around, and all of a sudden that maternal drive is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And many of them don't realize that the real impact of delayed conception, delayed childbearing. You have to think about life. What is the most important thing for you to do? Okay, now that you've defined what that is, I want you to think, what are all the things I have to do to maximize my chances of success for that outcome?
Yes.
The chances of never having children as a woman really ramp up with age. Don't quote me on this because I don't have the source handy, but I remember hearing someone recently say that when a woman gets to 30, or maybe it was 35, a certain age, she's got a 50-50 chance of ever having a child.
Wow.
Right.
That's shocking.
20-year-old women need to hear that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are running around in their hot girl summer, and they don't understand that if they don't settle down a good man by a certain point, they have a real risk of never fulfilling that dream. And I see women who are settling down men later in life who they don't really respect, who they're not really happy with, who can't really provide for them, because the men who they could have settled down in their early 20s dated them, but then they broke up and it didn't work out. Or they weren't realistic about who to date in their 20s, and they dated, the billionaire who's got who's practicing what I've heard called now, I think this is such a dysfunctional paradigm, but it's a funny term, Porsche polygamy. Have you heard that term?
No, never.
Yeah. Right. And so women don't get that message in our society, and it's heartbreaking to work with them in their late 30s, their 40s, where they're having health problems, often related to infertility. Mm-hmm. And so many of these women, they're married, they have a man in their life, and the one thing that they were most looking forward to after they'd built a career and a life and bought the house and had everything sort of settled out, having that child is now the thing they need my help with.
So do you believe that it's the birth control's fault primarily for delaying the childbirth, or is there other effects on the female body that birth control might be having other than just making them infertile while they're on it?
The narrative in for the pharmaceutical industry for birth control is that there's no downside. Yes. It's safe and effective, and it's a great way to manage your reproductive potential, let's just call it. But the flip side to that is it allows women to have sex with men without the potential baggage of a pregnancy, yes. Right? Or at least by massively reducing that potential outcome, right?
Yeah.
And so it encourages thinking of short-term pleasure instead of long-term priority. And you talk to women at 40, 50, 60, their children or their life, their world are the most important things to them. If they're married to a man they don't respect, the divorce is just a matter of time. That can ruin the man's life. It's part of what's driving high rates of male suicide. Mm-hmm. And the other phenomenon that's coming out of this is young men, because they're not having normal, healthy interaction with women because they're busy with Porsche polygamy,
yep.
The young men are falling into video games, they're falling into pornography, and then they get to 30 and the women are like, why do these 30-year-old men not know how to talk to us? It's like, well, yeah, they spent the last 10 years like watching pornography, playing video games because you were riding around with the Porsche polygamist. It's nothing personal, but this is like how society is
So the birth control is
operating.
more of a societal problem than a medical problem.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so, if I was a dad with a daughter, I would just say, look, honey, you're going to have a lot of temptation to run around, have fun, focus on short-term pleasure.
Yeah.
This chicken can come home to roost and it may be the single biggest regret of your life.
Right.
And that's a really unpopular statement in a lot of circles,
Yeah.
but it's reality.
I think it's starting to become more popular now.
It's because the
that's an
crisis
interesting
has
one.
gotten so severe.
Yeah.
I mean, the number of unmarried, unhappy women in their mid-30s who thought there was going to be a man they were happy settling down is higher and higher and higher. And even completely disregarding the women who are single, the women who are married and happily married, for them to be infertile in their 30s isn't something that they thought would happen. They thought it was a small chance. It's not a small chance. And even if it's a small chance, how big of a risk are you willing to take with this thing that's so important to you and that's going to be so important to your man?
Yeah.
Because the other thing is infertility drives a certain proportion of divorces. The man might never cop to that being the reason for him divorcing the wife. The wife might never cop to that being the reason the marriage fell apart. But the statistics are very clearly there. People who get divorced have a higher rate of infertility.
Yeah.
So you just have to think, what is the number one priority for me? Is it having kids? Is it having a career? Is it having, something else in life other than a career, other than kids? I don't know what that would be.
I agree. There's societal repercussions that we never thought about when we put every single young woman on birth control. It's the standard now.
I know.
It's rare that you date somebody who's not on it or hasn't been on it for a long time.
Right, exactly.
With a few minutes here, I'd love to wrap up with some medical rapid fire. Get your
do it.
your brain on some topics that I wrote down
Yeah.
here. Weight loss drugs. Ozempic is becoming the new birth control. People are getting on it in waves all over the country and all over the world. What is your opinion on Ozempic, semaglutide, and that class of medication?
My challenge to patients before we reach for what are effectively performance-enhancing drugs
Yes.
is, are you going to do the fundamentals? Because the reality is the Ozempic is not going to stop your heart attack. It's not going to stop your stroke. It's not going to stop the things that you really care about, cutting your life short and ruining it. The Ozempic is going to be a crutch for you to fix a number on a scale.
Yes.
If you do the fundamentals, not only are you going to see the number on the scale be what you want it to be, and I hate scales, by the way. I think weight loss is a huge, it's such a broken mindset.
I hate scales too. Do you use BMI or body fat devices?
We ask people, do you like how you look and how do you look?
Yeah.
BMI is a really broken metric too. We do have to get some women to be more realistic. We're like, look, you're a beautiful, fertile looking young woman.
Yeah.
You're actually going to be less attractive and appealing to men if you lose weight. So don't do it.
Brave of you to say something like that to one of your patients, but I respect it. And I think it needs to be said.
Amen.
So Ozempic, you're cool with it as long as they do the fundamentals first.
I've never prescribed it.
Okay.
And I doubt I ever will.
I think Adderall falls into a similar category of crutches for people who aren't doing the basics. What are your thoughts on Adderall and stimulants?
You have to understand that, using stimulants is like driving your car at 90 or 100 miles an hour. Can you do it? Yes. Do you need to be really careful doing it? Absolutely. Can you drive your car at 90 or 100 miles an hour, day after day, month after month, week after week without ever taking it into the shop? The harder you drive a car, the more time that car has to spend in the shop. You take a really top of the line, high level race car, they might rebuild the engine after every single race. And the reality is most of you are not Ferraris. You are the Corolla, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, don't drive your car like it's stolen all the time, and you'll get a lot of use out of it. But if you want to burn out at 50,000 miles, Ritalin's the best way to do that.
I don't know about you, but I am a Ferrari. With that being said, while we're talking about stimulants,
Yeah.
I'm currently drinking a Celsius. What are
No.
your thoughts on energy drinks? And do you have a preferred favorite if you were to pick one?
So I actually get all of my, particularly my high achievers, my CEOs, my highly paid professionals, my athletes, I get them off of particularly aluminum canned energy drinks because the aluminum load from the drinks is non-zero. It's significant, and particularly over time.
Yeah.
No one is showing up in the ER with acute aluminum toxicity, but you see it coming out in their hair, you see it in their blood, and you see it impairing their function, and then you see their function improve later on. So what I do is first we got to dial in their sleep so their brain is going to work optimally during the day anyway. We have to dial in things like their light and their diet and give them enough protein. But then we start using what I call functional medicine mocktails, where I'm creating a specific mocktail for them to replace their energy drink, and it's going to work better than your energy drink, and that's why I use it. So I'll combine amino acids, sometimes fatty acids, different herbs, different adaptogens, different types of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, things like that, in order to give people that lift that they've come to rely on the energy drink for. It's more sustainable, A, and B, because I can tailor it, I can get them better results. And then we can stack things on top of that we can't do with an energy drinks.
I never thought about the aluminum toxicity. My big problem with conventional energy drinks has usually been the sucralose.
Mm-hmm.
And there's yet to be a mainstream popular good energy drink that uses a more natural sweetener like stevia. And that's, I think, a damn shame and an opportunity for any entrepreneurs out there.
So now I actually, I'm speaking at a mastermind out in California in November. And one of the things I'm doing when I go to the mastermind is I'm going to bring my functional medicine mocktail mixing gear.
Yeah.
And I'm going to show them how to fix these functional medicine mocktails and talk them through some of the ingredients and how to come up with the formulations. And
if you have a video on that, I'd love to see it and share it.
That's we need to put that video together, but I don't have a good space to shoot it right now.
I will help you.
That would be great.
All right, next topic. Let's talk about GMOs. A lot of controversy around genetically modified plants, animals. What are your thoughts on GMO? Is it all BS, or are GMOs fine and it's a false flag?
Fundamentally, I think that the industrial farming paradigm has totally failed. It goes back to something I said earlier. To fix America's healthcare system, you really have to fix America's agriculture. Because what's happened with America's agricultural system is they've regulated it and subsidized it in such a way that you can't make money farming healthy food. Some people manage to still pull it off, like Alfie Oakes down in Naples, who's a good friend of mine, and I love him to pieces. Somehow he does it. God bless him. I think part of it's the zip code he's in. I mean, Naples, there's a lot of money, and you can charge $4 or $5 a pound for heirloom tomatoes. But you can't do that in most places.
No.
So you have to fix the food system. When I actually did my honors thesis in college, and my major was environmental health on factory farming and the public health problems associated with factory farming. And what I found was that the only reason that the factory farming model had become the dominant paradigm in animal agriculture in the United States, let alone the world, was that the government had created very clear systems of subsidies and regulations that made it almost impossible for small farmers to profit from animal agriculture. And it made it almost impossible for them to remain in compliance. And then they gave all these subsidies to the big corporations who had to have a certain amount of scale in order to basically meet the criteria that they set. And it's pretty clear that the agricultural industry was bribing politicians to pass laws that they wanted them to pass.
And they're making fruits and vegetables that are bigger, juicier, and more and higher quantities. And is that a good thing or a bad thing, and why?
Right. So this gets into the question of what are you really buying, right? And this actually is one of the fundamental problems with human health, is the way the human brain is wired to think about value. The human brain is wired to think about value largely in terms of quantity and superficial cues for value, right? And that's why you can take a woman who's an absolute medical train wreck and you can turn her into a 10 with a combination of implants, fillers, plastic surgery, whatever.
Sure.
And those women will come to me and they're like, well, how do I fix my this, that, and the other illness? And I'm like, well, all right, well, let's get to work. But that's what we're doing with our food. And because the human brain doesn't readily think about this, the consumer just has to think about it and basically overcome that subconscious drive. Like, yes, that chicken is smaller and more expensive, but it's $7 a pound because it grew up under the sun on an organic pasture, living a normal chicken life. And it also wasn't bred and overbred so thoroughly that it can't stand up like a lot of the industrially farmed chickens can't. And when you look at the food on a molecular level, right, there's more nutrient density in older food varieties, and there's more nutrient density in foods that are grown on organic, pasture. Like Ronnie Cummins, I met him just before he died. He was the president of the Organic Consumers Association, right? I mean, guys like Ronnie would talk about this all the time. The nutrient content and density of organic food is much higher than conventionally raised foods. And sadly, the industry has really captured a lot of organics because they realized there was a huge profit to be made by labeling things organic, whether or not they were actually grown with organic principles in mind. So, yeah, I mean, we need to change the way we think about food. I don't think that's actually going to change. I think it's too hardwired into the human brain.
Yeah.
But I think the food system is on track to collapse along with the medical system. And whatever comes out after that, I mean, I'm ready for it. And I'm here to be a part of it. And
Cool. We'll see what happens. And my drum
Right.
is grass-fed beef,
Right.
organic chicken, and you should be in good shape. And then
I know.
fruits that absorb pesticides, you need to be very careful,
Mm.
like apples.
Mm-hmm.
Organic apples always. All right.
Right.
Next set of questions. You ready for it?
Ready.
You have to pick 3 supplements of your favorite supplements. I don't care if it's herbal, vitamins, that you think everybody should be on universally.
Oof.
I know there's targeted ones for like you're trying to work on your testosterone, your fertility,
Yeah.
but there's a few that at least I say everybody should be on just for general safety and well-being. What are your go-to 3 supplements?
You know, I have to say that there are always exceptions to
Always.
rules.
Yeah.
Okay, that being said, the 3 supplements that I, really see people thriving on more of would be zinc.
Mm-hmm.
I see people doing really well with B6.
Mhm.
And I think if I had to pick one more, this is such a hard question for me to respond to because there's so many running through my head right now. I love tyrosine.
Interesting.
L-tyrosine is the amino acid that gets transformed downstream into dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. It's a game changer for my hard charging, stress addicts.
I take tyrosine.
How about that? Yeah.
Also, ZMA, it's zinc, magnesium, and aspartate, which is B6, which is...
I use that at night.
Yep.
It's my sleep cocktail.
Me too. I love it.
You know what I realized recently is that so one of the things about B6 that I love is that it not only is it essential for neurotransmitter production, but it's also essential for proper detoxification of the body.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of folate issues out there. I see a lot of B12 issues out there, but I think I see more B6 issues out there. And the B6 issues I see keeping company with serious mental problems, brain fog, fatigue, insomnia, more than the other 2. And I also see it going underdiagnosed more than the other 2. And I don't know, it's so hard to pick 3 supplements, but you can fix so many people with zinc, B6. And did I say vitamin C? No, I said tyrosine. Vitamin C is tough though because it's such a good supplement.
Yeah.
It helps detoxify the body. It helps you make neurotransmitters. It helps you, heal from or mitigate oxidative stress. It helps produce connective tissue. So yeah,
So many good ones out there. I know. I agree with you. I'd
it's
also
like having to
add
pick
fish
my
oil
favorite
and
child.
vitamin D if you're not getting enough sun. I think are no-brainers.
Although I'm going to tell you, I see people over supplementing on fish oil.
Do you?
100%.
Interesting.
I've seen people
I take a ton of it.
I've seen people push their fish oil levels to twice those of the Inuit and Eskimo who the recommendations are based on. And the other thing that they don't realize is that their balance of omega-3s to 6s depends upon the balance in their diet. And so they'll drop their omega-6 levels to very, very low. And I've gone back and forth with guys like Dr. Joe Mercola about this because Dr. Mercola,
one of the most controversial figures in medicine.
I know it. I love him. We're good friends. But, he said, look, Leland, you should be dropping your patients' omega-6 levels as much as possible. And I said, hey, listen, I haven't seen that work in clinical practice. The people coming to me with low omega-6 levels are tired, they're fatigued, they're wasting away, they can't put on muscle. And when you look at the biochemical pathways that people vilify with the omega-6s, they're often talking about arachidonic acid, and it's bad for you. It drives all these thromboxane and leukotriene pathways, and it increases inflammation, and the inflammation then makes the coronary artery disease or the Alzheimer's or whatever, right? But you know what else is funny? There's one group of people who love arachidonic acid supplements, and it's bodybuilders. Because the arachidonic acid you can use as a supplement in order to drive inflammation in the body, and it gives you a swole, pumped up look. So they'll use it before a show to actually improve their performance. And what people need to realize about this is that arachidonic acid is essential for your response to any insult. You need arachidonic acid in order to heal from traumatic wounds, your workout in the gym. So if you drop your omega-6s too much, you're not going to be able to respond to that. And I actually look at arachidonic acid levels in a lot of my patients, and that allows me to actually target my dietary recommendations and their fish oil recommendations to what their level actually is.
There's little snippets of knowledge that most people don't know. For example, I didn't know that. I expose myself tremendously to this type of stuff, and it interests me so much. And if you're listening to this and you find that sort of information fascinating, you got to go follow this guy on Instagram. Every post is like just like that bit of information, that snippet that you just gave. So I highly encourage everyone to go and check out Dr. Stillman's Instagram. So where is the best place to go connect with you and follow you?
The best place, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, the whole thing. If you put in my name, it'll come up. It's Leland Stillman. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes or whatever.
It will. All you got to do is click the description to connect with you. Are you currently accepting patients or people that love what you had to say?
Yes. Yeah, and we have a really wide variety of services. I have different programs for my, people who need me to basically keep them operating at 99 miles an hour. And then I have programs for people who are ready to take that deep dive into their health and figure it all out and really, get themselves dialed in. And then we have annual plans that we offer for families, individuals, people who are not ready for like a high ticket engagement with me. I have a really great staff. And the great thing about our annual plans is that we actually base them on group coaching. Cool. So you get multiple hours with my practitioners, my nurse practitioners, my nurse, and then you get a monthly group coaching session with me where you get to pick my brain about all the kinds of stuff that we talked about today so we can tailor these solutions to you. And we found that that's been, game changing for people. We had people go through a thyroid course recently and they raved about the group coaching, which a lot of them had never done before in a medical setting. So and then we have a lot of other things and programs coming out that are currently in development. And the best place to find out about those is my personal website, stillmanmd.com. You can apply to become a patient there. But we also have a website for the coaching side of what I do, which is stillmanwellness.com.
Well, Dr. Stillman, and there's not a lot of doctors out there right now like you. So if you're listening to this and you're looking for a good doctor, someone who's maybe a little bit unconventional from what you're used to, I think this is highly recommended to go have a conversation with Dr. Stillman and his team. And thank you for coming in. This has been a blast, shooting this stuff, talking medicine. It's not every day that I get the opportunity to reinvigorate that part of my brain. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get